Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. There's something remarkable about the human drive to explore the most inhospitable places on Earth. Throughout history, we've been drawn to the poles, not just by the allure of discovery, but by their power to reveal fundamental truths about our world. These vast white landscapes, seemingly empty and unchanging, are actually dynamic theaters where the past, present, and future of our planet converge. From the early adventurers who raced to plant flags at the ends of the earth, to today's scientists who camp for months in perpetual darkness or endless daylight, our relationship with the poles has evolved. What was once primarily about conquest has transformed into something far more crucial, a quest to understand the very mechanisms that govern our planet's climate, evolution, and future. In an age where satellite imagery can show us every crevice and ice sheet from space, one might wonder why scientists still brave temperatures that can freeze flesh or venture into storms that can strand them for weeks. The answer lies in what only direct observation and physical presence can reveal: the subtle interplay of forces that have shaped our world for millions of years, and the alarming changes now occurring at an unprecedented pace. My guest today has spent his career pursuing scientific treasures in these frozen extremes. Neil Shubin is the Robert R. Bensley Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, where his groundbreaking discoveries have helped reshape our understanding of evolution. His previous book, Your Inner Fish, took us deep into our biological past. Now, in Ends of the Earth, he takes us on a different kind of journey, to the poles, where the secrets of our planet's history and its uncertain future are locked in ice. It is my pleasure to welcome Neil Shubin here to the program to talk about Ends of the Earth. Neil, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it is a delight to have you here. Talk first a little bit about what it's like, as you describe in the book, being dropped off into one of these desolate places, either in Greenland, Antarctica, and just the sense of isolation of these places.
Yeah, you're in civilization for a long time, and then all of a sudden a plane or a helicopter drops you off on the tundra or the ice with all your food for 4 to 6 weeks, with your small team of 4 to 6 people, nylon tents, supplies and gear for doing science. And then the aircraft flies away, and it goes from being, you hear the roar of the aircraft to being silent. And you realize that all your entire world, there's no internet, there's no connection other than a satellite phone to call home or emerge for emergencies and so forth. But your really only connection is the 4 to 6 people with you, the landscape, which is like another partner in the expedition, and the job you're there to do and the science you're there to do. And when that plane takes off, it's a real quiet feeling. There's a lot of awe and wonder that happens in a place like that. There's quite a bit of fear that strikes me, honestly, from time to time. But the awe and wonder and serenity and disconnection from the normal life that I live here in Chicago or elsewhere where I work in the States and Europe. It's a remarkable moment when that flies away. And
part of that awe, it seems, is not just the isolation and being so disconnected, although that's certainly true, but it's also the sense of being connected to the history and to the sense of place and what that means.
Indeed, because you're part of a long line of researchers, of explorers, of people who've ventured into these distant regions. And honestly, I'm there. A lot of the wonder that I have and a lot of the awe that comes out is the capability to make profound discoveries in these places. That there's so much that we have yet to learn. Whole ecosystems, which science is just discovering now. Whole ecosystems in the present, ecosystems in the past, and the rocks that aren't covered by ice contain fossils which tell us about the history of life. Inside the ice, there's all sorts of things to learn. So it really is a laboratory, if you will, for discovery. And it's really propelled so many scientists over a very long time to these places.
And it is one of the few places where there's as much to discover about the physical universe. So much of the planet, so much of the Earth has been explored that there's still so much to explore here.
Yeah, I mean, here's just a moment, right? So I work on rocks not the ice. I work on the rocks that are exposed in the Arctic and Antarctica. And, one place we've worked in Antarctica was on the top of a mountain range on the Transantarctic Mountains. And these are mountains that rise about 9,000 feet, above the surface. But, the ice goes to about 7,000 feet. So you see about 2,000 feet sticking out. But when you're on the top of these mountains and you see ice that extends for miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles to the pole, you're working in rocks that contain tropical ecosystems from 370, 380 million years old. And inside those rocks, inside those ancient rivers and streams, are sharks and fish, some of them close cousins to us. So you cannot imagine a juxtaposition between present and past, which is more profound in so many ways. And there's a whole world to discover in those rocks. And there's a world to discover in the ice as well. I mean, scientists drilling deep into the ice itself have discovered lakes 2.5 miles under the ice. There are about 600 of these lakes, some of them the size of the Great Lakes in North America, and they contain life. They contain life that has been separated from the rest of the world for millions of years. So much to discover.
And one of the things nowadays is that they've become this central laboratory for understanding climate change. Talk about that.
Yeah, indeed. So, when you think about the poles are really fragile places. And I like to think the poles are sort of an invisible partner in all of our lives because changes to the poles affect all of us. We don't realize it, but it's true. And the thing about these places is they're sort of at a knife edge. So small changes to the climate of the planet can have profound effects on the ice at the poles. The Arctic is a case in point. When you think about the Arctic and you look at its temperature changes, and we can map those temperature changes from satellites, also from ground stations, stationed all over the Arctic, it's pretty clear that the Arctic, in different places doing it differently, but it's about 4 to 5 times, it's heating 4 to 5 times that which the rest of the world is doing. So it's heating very fast. And as it heats, obviously, the ice melts. But ice, here's the deal, is insulating. Ice reflects light. So when the ice melts, it exposes more dark water or dark land, which heats up more quickly and releases that heat. So what you get in is this amplification, where as it heats up, the world heats up, the ice melts. As the ice melts, more heat is released, and the ice melts even faster. So these places are changing very fast, both in the Arctic and Antarctica. And as they change, they affect our lives. That fresh water, 80% of the fresh water of our planet is locked in ice at the poles in Antarctica, Greenland, and parts of the Arctic. And that is an enormous amount that when that enters our oceans, when it enters ecosystems, it changes the world. It changes global circulation of the oceans. It changes the level of the seas. It changes global weather patterns, and on and on and on. So when you think about our lives here down south, closer to the equator, they're profoundly affected by changes that happen at the poles.
One of the things you point out that is counterintuitive in so many ways, that so much of the melting that's taking place is not above the surface, but below.
Yeah, that's a really surprising thing. So think about Antarctica. Antarctica is larger than the continental United States, and it's almost entirely covered by ice. Now, the melting of that ice is not happening from the top down, because actually, when you get towards the center of Antarctica, the ice there is growing, actually. It's cold. Where the ice mostly melts is along the margins, along the coast, as that ice interacts with relatively warmer ocean waters. Now, what's happening at these coastlines where much of the melt is happening, and we can map this, scientists have mapped this, like from JPL, University of California, Irvine, and elsewhere, have mapped it from satellites. What happens is the warm water melts the ice as the warm water for the ocean contacts the coastal ice in Antarctica. But where it's doing it is that ice slips underneath the glaciers and it's melting it from below. And as it melts it from below, it thins it from below, and then this ice breaks into the ocean, cleaves off, and enters the ocean. And as it does that, obviously the ice melts and then it raises sea level. And so it's the ice that's on the coast that is most worrisome to scientists who study these things. And it's that interaction between the warm ocean waters and that ice, which is, I think, most of interest to researchers now.
Certainly, there's all the negative consequences of this as it relates to all those aspects of the planet, the weather, etc. Talk a little bit about the upside scientifically from this melting. what it's exposing and what it's allowing us to learn about the planet and about its history.
Well, it's a sad irony that the melting ice exposes more rock for me to look at as a paleontologist, right? I hate to say it, but like this past summer, we were up there in July in Ellesmere Island, which is at a latitude, our sites are at about a latitude of 78 north, about 800 miles from the North Pole. And if you look at aerial photos that were done by aircraft that flew over the place during the early stages of the Cold War, say the late 50s, early 60s, and you compare it to satellite photos that were taken today, it's pretty remarkable how the ice has retreated, during those decades, during those 60 years or so. And part of the thing that's exposed there are rocks that contain fossils that tell us about the history of the Earth. So the melting has exposed. I mean, it's what's bad for the Earth, what's bad for humanity is good for paleontologists, I guess. Is that situation where more rock is exposed? Interestingly, however, the ice contains artifacts of our past. So when you look inside the ice, well, scientists from Canada looked at melting ice at northern Ellesmere Island, say about 600 miles from the North Pole. And they looked at the waters that were melting and they used like high technology DNA sequencing to look inside that waters. And what they found was many species of viruses in there that you'd never see under a microscope, obviously. But they saw many species of viruses that were being released by the melting ice, some of them which could infect animals, particularly polar animals up in that area, and probably infected them in the past. So, and it's not unusual, say in Siberia, for melting to cause anthrax, melting permafrost or ice to cause breakouts of anthrax and other diseases that, these microbes were locked in the ice for centuries in some cases and are released into the world. There is one case of a virus that was locked in ice for 50,000 years that, once under in the laboratory was induced to reproduce again. So what we're seeing is within the ice and the melting are, long lost inhabitants of our planet being released again.
It also tells us something about the adaptation of life forms there.
Yeah, that's a part that really blows my mind. And I had such fun writing about it in the book because you see, when you first look at these landscapes, they don't look alive. You really don't see much. In Antarctica, I didn't see a bird, I didn't see a mammal, I didn't see anything. And in the Arctic, depending on where we are, if we're closer to the coast, we'll see some stuff, but not inland. But when you learn how to look, all of a sudden life pops out everywhere. And the life is finely in tune to these extraordinary and extreme environments. Animals have adaptations to survive the cold and dry climates. They have adaptations to deal with the changing circadian cycles of 24 hours of daylight in the summer, 24 hours of dark in the winter. Animals have adapted to have antifreeze proteins in their bodies, in their blood, and in their tissues, which prevent ice from forming. Some animals have developed a new form of sugar, which can replace the water in their cells. And when the situations get really harsh, they replace the water with the sugar, and they turn into a form of a glass almost that can shatter. And they stay as this glass-like substance till the conditions change. Trees, the one tree that's up in on Ellesmere Island and in parts of Greenland is the Arctic willow. The Arctic willow doesn't grow up like a tree with branches. In fact, you see no trees that grow up with branches. But what happens with the Arctic willow? It's a true tree with roots and bark and so forth, but it grows along the ground, never rising more than an inch or two. It grows laterally along the ground, hugs the ground. It doesn't grow upwards. So adaptation after adaptation in life up there really has been extraordinary. From antifreeze proteins to new life cycles to different kinds of hair and so forth to live in extraordinarily cold, dry, windy environments.
And what does it tell us about evolution? What are we learning about evolution from this?
We're learning quite a bit. I mean, you learn the extremes which evolution can attain. We learn how fast adaptations like these can happen. We learn, for instance, when you think about an antifreeze protein, it seems so impossible to evolve. How does evolution happen? How does evolution produce an antifreeze protein in, say, an Antarctic ice fish swimming around in the southern seas? Well, in most cases, it's by repurposing things that already exist. So the antifreeze proteins in some Antarctic fish is actually a modified liver enzyme. that just functions normally in the liver of other fish, but a small number of mutations have transformed it into an antifreeze protein. So we're seeing the way novelties can arise, new inventions can arise in a relatively short time. And typically it happens by repurposing what already exists rather than inventing something new. So the outcome can be dramatic, but it's by really kind of tweaking something that already exists. So it's fabulous that way. The other thing that up there that what teaches us is possibly what life may look like on other planets, or at least how to look for life on other planets. When you think about the technologies that are necessary to find life 2.5 miles under the ice and analyze that living form, well, that provides engineers with notions to be able to test new devices, perhaps to sample frozen worlds in our own solar system, such as Europa. But also, when you think about the microbes that live under the ice, they're removed from the sun. They have whole different kinds of ecosystems. It gives us a sense of the extraordinary ecosystems that can happen through evolution in highly remote environments. So it's a remarkable laboratory to learn about our world.
It also gives us a sense of the dangers that we might find in other places when you talk about the microbes and the viruses, et cetera, that are just not visible.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and I mean, I got to say, when you're working in these places, you feel kind of small. The landscapes are very huge, and our bodies are very small. Um, and there are a lot of ways that things can go awry on an expedition, and there are a lot of ways things can go awry as things melt out of the ice. So absolutely, you feel that sense of I wouldn't call it danger, but definitely threat.
One of the things you write about it is the degree to which these places on both poles have become more geopolitically important. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, just witness President Trump talking about Greenland, right? I mean, that's just in a nutshell. I mean, you think about, well, as I said, the Arctic let's take the Arctic rather than Antarctica for a second. The Arctic is heating 4 to 5 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. And what that's doing is it's changing those landscapes. Now, much of the Arctic is ice that covers the ocean. And some of the Arctic is land, which is covered by ice. But as that ice retreats, the land becomes more accessible, those oceans become more accessible. So new shipping routes open up, new fisheries open up. As the land is exposed, and extraction industries look up in those areas for mineral, oil, and gas extraction. And indeed, the seafloor itself becomes accessible and accessible to fisheries as well as oil and gas and mineral extraction. So these areas are now, the largest patch of land that's actually exposing from year to year that has geopolitical and economic consequences for nations across the globe. A quirk of geology makes those areas a bigger source of geopolitical struggle. And now there's a mountain range under the North Pole in the ocean seafloor below the North Pole that extends from Siberia to Greenland and Ellesmere Island. And that mountain range and its geology has allowed Greenland, Canada, and Denmark through Greenland. I'm sorry, Russia, Denmark through Greenland, and Canada through Ellesmere Island to make claim to those lands as part of their own territory through the UN law of the sea. So it's a big struggle.
And what's been the sense of international cooperation in terms of the scientific part of this that we talked about earlier?
Well, traditionally, there's been an enormous amount of collaboration among scientists and of different nations in the polar regions, and that's actually been a real strength of the place. I mean, Russian, American, and French drilling teams were the ones who actually worked to drill 2.5 miles under the ice to find those lakes. So there's been an enormous amount of cooperation in those areas, and there continues to be an enormous amount of cooperation in studying glaciers in Antarctica and studying the Arctic and so forth. The challenge really comes when the struggles further south, such as the situation in Ukraine and so basically that sets Russia against Europe and the United States, then all of a sudden that affects treaties that happen up north. So what's happening up north is we're finding the fraying of certain committees and treaties, largely because the Russians aren't at the table anymore, and the Russian component of the Arctic is by far the largest. So it's hard to have any meaningful cooperation up in the Arctic region without all partners at the table, and particularly the one with the largest tract of area.
How has technology played a role in all of this? Modern tools, modern technology, satellite technology.
Yeah, satellite technology has really transformed our understanding of the glaciers themselves. Because you think about a field team. You can only a field team if you're actually walking over the glaciers or even in an airplane. There's only if you have a glacier the size of Florida or Texas, you can only analyze a small part of it. But a glacier can see the entire. I mean, a satellite can see the entire glacier all at once, and they can sample it. And some of the technologies are truly remarkable. Some of these satellites can sample changes to the height of a glacier on the order of microns, which is incredible. And they can map it continuously. Some of them can look at how fast the glaciers are melting by looking at changes in the mass of the glaciers. So these glaciers are being continually monitored by satellites that can see the entire glacier, say in Greenland or Antarctica, that can map the entire region over periods of time. And that's like having eyes in space that can see even on cloudy days and map and give what's called a weather report of the glaciers, pretty much every day. And what that is showing is pretty alarming. That is, when we can look at the melting of the glaciers, and the melting has increased dramatically in the last 20 years. It's gone from being around 100 gigatons a year to about 260 gigatons a year of melt in Greenland, and about the same in parts of Antarctica. So our eyes in the space are telling us, how these regions are changing.
Does technology give us any potential solutions to any of this?
Yeah, there's a number of teams doing this. And, I got to say, when you talk about the kind of engineering approaches to managing climate change, people tend to have, a lot of different reactions to it. One of the I was at a conference last spring, which was talking about how to stop the melting of glaciers. Because once you get the glaciers melting in the contact with warm seawaters, the question is how can you buttress it? And they were talking about different technologies to create little dams and barriers, which will prevent water from entering underneath the glaciers. Talking about ways to drill holes in the glaciers to stabilize them in certain ways, and inject ice actually or barriers that prevent melting. So there are people talking about engineering approaches to try to save the glaciers from entering the oceans, and these are geoengineering technologies, glacial geoengineering.
And what speed are these things moving at? How realistic is it?
They're quite quickly. I mean, so some of these glaciers are melting. The edges of them are melting about over a kilometer a year, so that's over half a mile a year, which is really remarkable. Some of these glaciers are moving so fast, they're moving about a mile a year. So you're seeing some very dramatic changes. Now, you wouldn't see them if you look day to day, you wouldn't notice those changes, but if you're a satellite, you'd be able to map those changes very rapidly. So these are moving pretty quickly. So how feasible are these technologies? At the moment, not very feasible. How expensive are these technologies? They would be crazily expensive. But if we're at a situation where these things are melting fast and changing coastlines and causing trillions of dollars of damage to agricultural belts, to cities and so forth, all of a sudden the economics change a bit.
And what is the cutting edge of the research right now? What are the things that we don't know the answers to, that we're still struggling on these expeditions there?
Well, one of the things is, when we talk about the glaciers melting fast, one of the greatest challenges is one of the ones that would seem simple, but it's not, is predicting the future. That is, I can tell you how fast the glaciers are melting now. I can tell you how they're entering, how much water is entering the oceans. But I cannot tell you with any great precision how a certain percentage of temperature rise will affect those same glaciers in the coming century. So really getting quantitative approaches, getting the right measurements, getting the science together so that we can more accurately predict the future, I think is sort of the holy grail of glaciology and climate science.
And where is the money coming from for all of this?
Well, much of this is very expensive stuff. And, this is really only governments can pay for this. So the U.S. Antarctic program has been an incredible funder for research in the polar regions. Likewise, the British Antarctic Survey. So each country has their own polar program. There are some private foundations that are involved, but just the scope it's really a federal responsibility because the funding is just it's just so extraordinarily expensive to work there.
And international funding?
Oh, indeed. Yeah, indeed. And there's quite a bit of cooperation, as I said earlier. So, for instance, the British and the Americans have worked on some of these melting glaciers in West Antarctica for a number of years in the past decade. And there are all kinds of discussions for that going forward.
And when do you plan to be back there?
Well, I was there this past summer, and we made some really great discoveries of new fossils, which we're actually working on now. So we want to finish the discoveries that we made this past summer before planning a new expedition. But I'm thinking probably not this coming summer, but the following summer to revisit the Arctic. It takes about a year of planning for an expedition, so we'll make the decision probably this spring whether we want to go back or not. And then if the decision is yes, then we'll begin the preparations, preparing food and aircraft and all that good stuff.
Neil Shubin, his new book is Ends of the Earth. Neil, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks.